Hello, hello. Well, I hope this is working. I think it's working. And if it is working, hello, everyone. I'm Arsalan Mohammad, and welcome. Welcome to this talk between myself and the author Gary Astridge. Thank you for signing up. It's a conversation about the book Beats and Threads, which is presented by the Beatles Story and Julien's Auctions. If you're a die-hard Beatles fan, and let's be honest, if you're not a die-hard Beatles fan, then maybe you're in the wrong talk right now. You're really in for a big treat this evening, because we're joined by Gary Astridge, a drum historian, drummer, Beatles fan, and now an author, who has worked closely with the patron saint of drums himself, Ringo Starr, to make a fantastic book documenting Ringo's archive of Beatles-era clothes and drum kits. Gary's had the awesome experience of having been invited into the innermost sanctum of Beatledom to create this book, thanks to his phenomenal knowledge of drums, and especially Ludwig drums, knowledge which he's acquired over decades of research and collecting. Having had free rein to Ringo's archives, a vast subterranean network of caves somewhere under the Atlantic Ocean, or I'd like to think anyway, Gary uncovered unimaginable treasures, world-famous costumes and clothes that are instantly recognizable to all of us. And of course, drums dating back to pre-Beatles days, back to the kit, sorry, from pre-Beatles days to the kit that Ringo played on the roof of the Apple building in January 1969. So in Beats and Threads, which is available now on juliensauctions.com and at the Beatles Story Museum, and if you haven't got a copy, you really should go and get a copy because it's fantastic. Gary travels back all over Ringo's extraordinary career, all the way back to Liverpool in the late 1950s, and the kit that that Ringo's stepdad got for him from Hessie's, the music shop in Liverpool. Harry got this kit on hire purchase, and the actual hire purchase agreement is one of the documents that is reproduced in Beats and Threads. And it's a fascinating document because when you look at it, you can see that as recently as 1958, a married woman had to have her husband sign the hire purchase agreement. A married woman couldn't just go and buy a set of drums on her own. So that hire purchase agreement is just one of the wonderful historic documents in the book. And well, really, I could go on and on and on about all the wonderful things that are in the book and bore you all rigid. So I think what we should do is hear about all this from the man himself, the man who knows Ringo's gear inside out and also understands the heart and the history behind all of it. So this is a chance to step inside the world behind the beat, to see how the music, the clothes, and the astonishing magical mystery tour of the 1960s all came together to shape Ringo's legacy. Gary, hi, everyone. This is Gary. Hello,
Arsalan,
Gary.
everyone. Hello.
Great to have you on. And just before we get into the book, I just wanted to ask you something that really struck me when I was looking through it. Just begin our evening by telling us what happened to you as a 7-year-old on the night of February the 9th, 1964. I believe there was something good on telly that night.
Yeah, there was. What's interesting, it's always awkward starting this part of the story off because there's 73 million people that have the same beginning, you know. But for me, it was a family birthday party for my grandmother, and this was the English side of my family. So
Oh,
everyone was in attendance at my uncle's house. There was about 30 people when you take into account my grandmother, aunts, uncles, cousins, and uh, we're all there for the birthday. We go into a room to watch the Ed Sullivan show, and I really didn't catch on to what the excitement was. And when they came on, I was distracted watching television because I'm seeing all of my relatives act out of character, laughing, pointing at the TV, hearing my aunts say, "Oh, how cute they are," you know, and have my uncles say they're wearing wigs, you know, all of those things. But once they got quiet enough where I could hear, I was one of the ones that was just spellbound, and through watching it, I mean, that quickly, Loved them all immediately, but I laser locked on Ringo. For some reason, he was just my guy. And
Really, you went straight for Ringo. There
yeah,
was something Ringo.
yeah, immediately. And my parents reinforced the fact, telling me that the next day all I was doing is tapping away on different things, and then came the story that I had mentioned to you, where my father took two empty coffee cans and cut out the tops and bottoms, put the plastic lid on both of them, and taped them together. And even though they were bongos, to me they were drums. And my dad cut off the ends of two wooden spatula spoons, and those became my drumsticks. And it was uh, never looking back from that point on.
But to say that's a very confident move coming from parents. Most parents would run a mile before doing anything that enabled their 7-year-old to make even more noise.
Yeah, exactly. You're exactly right. Yeah, when it's just noise, it's not even, yeah.
So you progressed from the tin cans to proper drums fairly well. You were 7 then, but when did that happen then? When did you become a drummer with your first drum kit?
Yeah, it was all in increments. One mistake that I made. My dad took me to a local music shop, supposedly to get a drum kit, and the salesman was a bad one, because he took me into a little music room where a drum kit was set up, and he said, "Go ahead and play something." So what do? Is I just play Wipeout on the snare drum. And he
Mm.
tells my dad, "Well, I don't think he's ready for a whole kit, so maybe you just want to get a snare." And I was like, "No," but it just moved on from there. The older I got, then I started buying drums, and then came the time when I just thought, why don't I have a Ringo kit? And that's started the passion of collecting.
So it was you had seen Ringo on the Ed Sullivan Show. You had immediately felt that there was a sort of connection there. What was it that sort of got you really obsessing about Ludwig kits? Because apart from being Ringo's drum of choice, once you started collecting and playing drums sort of properly, what were the characteristics? What were the attributes of Ludwig as a brand that drew you to them?
Well, for me, I was a little naive, because I was so focused on Ludwig. I never really paid attention to knowing there was other brands to choose from. That's all I cared about. And all I wanted in my little world was, I wanted drums so I can sound like Ringo. Thinking
Mm.
it was that simple. So I never really looked at anything, not until years and years later. But in my little world, and you have to go back to living in a quiet little street in Buffalo. Um, no other kids really involved with music, and the only music you were getting in the '60s was either off the AM radio, sometimes on television, and records, right? And everything was limited. It's not at all like it is today. So, it would be kind of cool if you're riding your bike past someone's house and you hear a Beatles song coming out, from their living room window, and it's like, yes, can I just stand here and listen? But it was very exciting times, but it was very, very limited, and um, uh, all of what you had access to.
That makes it even more remarkable, the impacts they made, given that the channels of dissemination were so narrow. But there was something that, as a British person, I've always been really fascinated to read about, which is that Ringo seemed to be the most popular Beatle, certainly in the early days. Was that your experience? I mean, this is something I've only read, but did you find that? I mean, was there a particular um, impact that Ringo made on American kids, people your age, your friends, and so on?
Yeah, well, I guess for me it was, it was a little heavy-handed on my end, because he was my favorite, but I loved them all. But if I think about it, I mean, he was um, oh, he was just always smiley. He was funny, Yet he had sad eyes, and you just felt like, oh, how cuddly, But they all had a charisma, right? They all had their own ways about him. But yeah, he just stood out to me. So, and it was reinforced by other people that I knew that played drums, and felt the same way.
they really responded to Ringo.
Yeah.
They found their hero in him. Because of
Hmm.
course, as the decade progressed, you got successive waves of bands coming through, and then of course the music scene progresses and things get heavier, and you get rock and psychedelia, and then heavy blues and so on. But Ringo really remained your lodestone throughout that time.
Yeah. I kind of, uh, even though I could appreciate other music, the focus was always on him. And even though I think I'm a good drummer, I'm not a Ringo, I'm not a Greg Bissonette. I can't do jazz and things like that. But what I found interesting about Ringo is that he did have, and does have, something very special and unique. And it's self-taught. And
Yeah.
being a left-handed drummer playing a right-handed kit, I think a lot of people know that. It just, that gives him a uniqueness. So being at home, practicing drums to the latest Beatle album, just putting the record on and playing a certain song over and over and over. It's like, how come I can't get it? How come what am I not hearing? But it was just a lot of fun just to spend hours and hours and hours playing and trying to emulate him.
So we'll skip a few decades. We'll skip a few decades because we don't have a lot of time. But
Yeah.
I suspect a lot of fascinating things that happened in those few decades. But we'll come to the point where you actually end up working with Ringo
Yeah.
on this book, Beats and Threads. Now, obviously, we can say things like, would that 7-year-old have even imagined in his wildest dreams that he would have worked with Ringo Starr? But just set the scene for us. How did that come about? How did you get to the point where you were actually collaborating with him, delving through his archives, and so on?
Yeah. I think you have to first tell the story of how it all started. Um, I have a business where it's in the medical industry. And so I was sitting behind this very desk that I'm at right now, and I get a phone call, and it was sometime in late 2012, and it was a gentleman by the name of Jerry Busek from the Grammy Museum in Los Angeles, and he told me that started explaining to me that the Grammy Museum just signed an agreement with Ringo and Barbara to do an exhibit on Ringo's life called Ringo, Peace and Love. And he said, and we asked Ringo specifically to cover the Beatles era if we could display the drum kit he used on the Ed Sullivan Show to signify the beginning of his Beatles career, and his Maple kit or his Get Back kit, whatever you want to call it, to signify um, uh, the end of his Beatles career. So, Ringo said, yeah. But they found that when they called and talked to his people in London, they said, we have drums, but we don't know what drums make up what drums to make the proper kits. And we don't even know what hardware and parts we have. So
Sorry, who are those people that were saying that?
the person I think it was Scott Ritchie, and that's a name for everyone to remember as we go along in this interview. He likes to be called Scotty, but he's Ringo's personal assistant, and he plays a big role in anything that I've done. But so what happened was they started. I said I would help. And the little side note was I thought all this was a joke when I first got the phone call, because it was just so far outside my world, and I'm focused on my business. And when somebody's saying, hey, we have this Ringo Beatles project, I just thought, okay, who is this? But, so I get involved first with like them sending high res photos, and then with his earlier kits, the Oyster Black Pearl kits. Each drum that has the Oyster Black Pearl wrap, the swirl pattern is actually a fingerprint. And through thousands of pictures that I have in my collection, it was pretty easy to say, okay, this drum goes with, this tom goes with this bass drum and things like that. So I was able to sort them out and put things together. But in the time frame, we're not finding cymbal stands, drum pedals, and things of that nature. So as we were progressing with getting these drums ready, I said that I have a collection, everything, same year, same, all of what Ringo used. And we can take what I have to make his drum kits whole. And one of my points in pitching this was all of his drum kits were missing like the bass drums with the logo. And I said, you just can't take just three or four drums, stack them behind a plexiglass wall, and say, "Here, folks, this is all that's left." I said, "Let's bring them back to life." So it was run through the channels. Ringo agreed, so that's what they allowed me to do. And when they opened for the exhibit, and Ringo saw the drum kits, I think he was impressed with what I had done. And along the way, with everything that I did have done for Ringo, I learned a lot about myself. And some important key parts was I found that I'm not starstruck. I don't mind flying under the radar. I can be confidential. I really do know this world. I was extremely confident. And then I was surprised to learn, wow, there's some things that I'm knowing that Ringo is hearing for the first time, you know? So I have to throw this out because it was an important thing. There was one point along this journey that I have with him where he singled me out one day. He came up to me and he said, because of your research, I learned about a lot about things I didn't know. And more importantly, you helped bring back fond memories of things that I had forgotten. Thank you. And wow. It was really emotional for me to hear that from him. So, yeah, and there's so many lovely moments, but go ahead. You were saying?
No, I can't imagine anything better than having a Beatle say to you, "Thank you for reminding me of this. I'd forgotten about it." Yeah. I think that must be for you a wonderful feeling. Well, you said that you weren't starstruck, and you said that you found in yourself these attributes that enabled you to work productively with Ringo. I'll be honest, I'd be starstruck too. I'd completely collapse. I think if I met Ringo for the first time, and I think just out of my curiosity, what can you tell us what it was like just to meet him for the first time, just to sort of walk in the room and Ringo's there, this guy that has been a kind of North Star for you since you were 7.
Yeah.
What was he like?
What's interesting, I always had these awkward moments. The very first one, this was in 2008. I befriended Ringo's drum technician. His name is Jeff Jonas, another name to remember. He's been with Ringo since 1989. So in 2008, I meet Jeff. We're talking after a press conference before the start of an All-Star Band tour. So Jeff and I are eye to eye talking. And as we're talking, you hear Ringo's voice. He walks into the room and he's behind me. And it sounds like he's close. And he's talking to some people, and he exits the room. And Jeff looks at me and he says, "Thank you." I'm going, "For what?" He says, "I don't really know you, and in this moment, you never really know what somebody's going to do. You could have really gotten stupid." And he goes, "Thanks for not doing anything."
Thanks for keeping it together.
Yeah. So, and I guess he's seen enough of that. And then the first time I met Ringo, I'm sitting at a table. Ringo's sitting at another table, and he gets up, and I'm, casually looking at him, thinking, "Oh my God, there's my hero." And he starts to walk behind me, and the person sitting next to me says, "Hey, Ringo, this is Gary Astridge. We'd like you to meet him." So he just puts his hand on my shoulders, and I lean my head back, and I'm looking up at his nose, and he just goes, "Hi, how are you?" He goes, "Enjoy the show tonight." He taps me on the shoulder and walks away. And then I'm just thinking, is that my moment? That's it. That's what I did with it. And I, you couldn't help but think that. But then something else would happen, another project or whatever, and just over time, it just kept getting better and better and better.
What a moment. I've been Beatled. Hand on the shoulder. Yeah. So then how do we transition from that project into Beats and Threads? How did the actual book itself come about?
Okay. Well, I've done a lot of different projects for Ringo. And Scotty, who I had mentioned, Ringo's personal assistant, he would occasionally say, "Hey, if you ever want to do a book on Ringo's drums, I'm sure he would authorize it." And I kept saying no. And the reason was you know what? I never want to be that guy, the one that, where Ringo would say, oh, yeah, well, a few years has gone by. Now here he goes. Now we're seeing the real Gary doing the, hey, look at me. I wrote a book. And so I always just turned it down. And so Scotty called one day and he said, I'm always asking you about doing a book. And I said, yeah. He goes, well, that's off the table. And I said, well, I don't care. I wasn't going to do it anyway. And he said, and he was telling me about this idea that he came up with, Beats and Threads, and he ran it by Ringo and stuff, and Darren Julien, your boss, right? So he said, "Would you want to do that?" And I go, "Explain it to me again." So he said, Ringo's drums, and it was going to match it up with all his clothes. He goes, "I've archived all of the clothes that Ringo has. I photographed them." He goes, "We got everything," and he goes, "It would just be a nice, different tie-in." And I just said, you know what, sign me up. That'll do, because it was a charity project and things like that. And I also thought, what's good about doing this? I got Ringo's backing. I have my knowledge. I have access to his drums. I have access to his clothes, and I have access to him to do the book. So I says, who gets that? And so that's how it went. And so for me, it was like, this isn't just a coffee table book. I said, this is going to be historical. We're going to be showing people pictures they've never seen, high def pictures of his drum kits, different angles, and the same with his clothing. And so that was the genesis of getting things started.
So did the decisions on what to include in the final book, were you involved in those decisions, or did that come mainly from Scotty and Ringo's people about
Yeah.
we'll include that drum kit or that outfit or whatever it may be?
Yeah, actually, it was a simple chain of command. It was like just me and Scotty working, and then him going directly to to Ringo. But Scotty had a lot of conversations, and I had a lot of conversations on this. And then the awkward part was when I said, "Okay, so where do we start? Where do we start? Where do we end?" And he goes, "Whatever you want to do, whatever you want to put in it, put in it." And so I just said, my expertise, my window is, from childhood to the end of the Beatles' career. I go, other than that, I said, they're going to have a really, really, really big book. So I said, okay, let's just do this. So then we incorporated it and talked a lot about how much we wanted. And when I did it, I wanted it to fulfill the thirst for a lot of drummers. But I didn't want to get too geeky where other people would say, this book lost me. But be tying the clothes. And even if you're not a clothes person or a drum person, it's just cool to see these instruments because they're historical artifacts now. And there's a lot of cool stories behind, every drum kit. And with the clothes, even if you might not be a clothes person, it's just to say, oh my God, that's what they wore on Sgt. Pepper. Look at the detail. It gets so deep. And so it was fun. And for me, pulling the information out, I just dove into the years and years of my notes and writings and just said, okay, blew the dust off and it updated a lot of it from what I knew now. And that's a long-winded answer about how it came together.
Well, it's fascinating. And just to clarify, you had, like you just said now, you had actually been not just collecting Ludwig drums, but documenting them, writing about them, researching them, and keeping meticulous records of what you had. So when it came time to restore Ringo's drums, you had all that information there. And then when it came time to start working on the book, you had a whole wealth of data to draw on. So of course, this is designed for you, this project. Just before we actually get into the book itself, I was just wondering, were there any items that didn't make the final edit that you would have loved to have had in there?
Yeah, I can't think of anything off the top of my head, but there was a lot. But once again, the book is, I think, over 300 pages. Weighs what, 7 pounds? And it's enough really to make anyone happy. But there is so much. There could be a second volume, really. And but it was just trying to have a nice balance.
I know it does sound, just thinking about it, it does sound a bit churlish of me to be saying, what do you regret not having in the book when, like you say, there is so much that is in the book. So let's open up the book. Let's have a look inside. And well, we'll start at the beginning. And here we have, do you recognize this young fella? It's
Yes, I do, Your Honor.
the Beatle, quite the quiff going on there. Um, you begin the book with one of the oldest kits in Ringo's archive, and this just shows how amazing this book is, how far back it goes. He still has these kits, and for this Ajax kit, we even have that. This is what I was just mentioning now. We even have the hire purchase agreement that his stepdad Harry signed on his behalf. Now, obviously, you can't see it here, perhaps, but like I was saying earlier, when you read this form, it's just a astonishing historical artifact. Like I was saying, married women couldn't have a form like this; they had to have it co-signed by their husband. But tell us about this Ajax 1958 kit that Harry had agreed to buy for him.
Okay.
What was he playing this with Rory Storm, or was this
Yeah, he
predating?
was. Yeah, yeah. And first of all, just for the record, is that Ringo no longer has this kit. When he traded it in at one
Okay,
point, it was just lost to history. But what's nice about this, having documents, and Ringo has, has quite a few. Some that were saved by his mother, which is really cool. But with having this, it just kind of verifies, because many times I know when people have given me information or sought me out to get me information, many times the stories didn't make sense, and then and you really had to work hard trying to put the pieces of the puzzle together. But with this particular kit, what makes it interesting is that originally Ringo was given a used drum kit by his stepdad Harry, and Ringo said, "I was old, it was dirty, I wanted something shiny and new." So he bought this Ajax kit. The kit that his father originally gave him was a Slingerland kit, and it was a high-end U.S. kit. And Ajax was a lesser model. It was, but it was shiny and new, and that's what Ringo wanted. So that's what he bought. Yeah, yeah. So when one of the things that it's, I don't even know if I could explain it so it doesn't sound confusing, but when I talked to Ringo about this, and talked about this document, he had said that actually his grandfather gave him the money for the kit, and when Ringo went to purchase it, he was only like I think 16, so he couldn't. He was too young. So I think that Harry knew that he had the backing, that the grandfather was going to be responsible if little Richie didn't come through making the payments. But it is just interesting to see this, and it just tells me, and it was very evident in Ringo talking about it, how much he loved Harry and how much Harry loved Ringo. So very tender story.
there's a story in Mark Lewison's book Tune In about, I think it was maybe that kit you were talking about. Harry originally came from Romford in
Right.
East London. And of course, he'd moved up to Liverpool where he'd married Ringo's mum. And of course, Ringo was rather like you. He was just tapping things all the time. He clearly wanted to play the drums. And Harry heard of a drum kit for sale on a visit down to see relatives near London. And he bought it and transported it all the way back to Liverpool
Yeah. By
on the
train.
train. And in those days, I mean, London transport's appalling enough now, but in those days, it really would have been an ordeal to carry an entire drum kit
Yeah. Could
up.
you imagine? Yeah. The
So,
interesting part in talking to Ringo, he elaborated a little bit more. He said that when Harry went back to Rumford, it was for a funeral of a cousin of his that passed away. And Ringo says, well, after they buried him, everyone went back to the house, and then Harry sees drum kits in a room in a corner, and he asks the wife. He goes, "What are those?" And he goes, "Oh, you didn't, it's basically you didn't know that my husband played the drums." And they made a deal, and there that day, and that's when Harry brought him back. So
was that man who died? It was his
yeah,
drums.
yeah,
Oh my
yeah.
God, I didn't know that.
Yeah. So
I
it's
didn't know
amazing
that.
in talking to Ringo, getting things firsthand from him.
Yeah.
It's just he just tells a story, and it's funny because as I talk to him at various times, every time I do, I found that the best way to describe it, Arslan, is that uh, everything, all my senses go into high def, just taking it all in. And many
Yeah.
times when Ringo just gives you an off the hand comment, in my head, I'm going, based on what I know, oh my God, you're giving me gold nuggets left and right. And what you just told me changes a lot of things. So that's what makes this book special, too.
So in August 62, he joins the Beatles, and immediately he's absorbed into the ultra professional NEMS operation. So here we can see a schedule that Brian Epstein's office had prepared for the Beatles, because, of course, by now Brian was the Beatles manager, and he was really shaping them up, professionalizing them, scheduling all their appearances. And I don't think we can zoom in here, but this is a schedule from, I believe, Gary, you said this is the week after Ringo joined. So this
Well,
is August,
it's the day after Ringo joined,
the day
right?
after
So
Ringo joined.
yeah, so
Well,
he first performed with them on the 18th, and then here it is the 19th.
well, this is a
So
this is a great. We should, this is like a good sales pitch for the book, isn't it? You should buy the book so you can see this properly. But I was fascinated because there was on the 22nd, I think, on Brian's schedule there for the 22nd, he instructs the Beatles to be aware of some special arrangements which are being made at their cavern lunchtime session that day. What was he referring to? What was going to be happening at the cavern that day?
actually, I don't recall, but if anyone buys the book, they'll know. But it's interesting.
The
Yeah.
spoiler alert is they were being filmed by Granada TV that day.
Very good. Thank you.
It was it's a clip they always show now in documentaries, but it's a very
Thank
flickery film of them performing Some Other Guy. And Ringo is just a few days into his Beatles career. But I just love seeing in the book how you've got these documents that show how meticulously organized Brian was, because obviously we can never give enough tribute to Brian Epstein, who made the Beatles sort of global, who made the Beatles stars. He took their raw talent, shaped it, and brought them to the world. So I'm just talking a bit quickly now because I know that we have a lot to get through, and I don't want to keep everyone. But let's move on to 1963, and here's Ringo's second, but as you say in the book, the most important drum in the book. This is the Ludwig Jazz Festival snare drum. Talk us through this, and especially tell us what is that sort of dust that we can see in that picture there.
Okay. Yeah. This snare drum Ringo got with his very first Ludwig kit. And even though he had three other Ludwig Oyster Black Pearl kits that came with the same model snare drum, this jazz festival, Ringo always used the first one, this one. And even when he was using his maple kit, the rooftop kit, whatever you prefer to call it, he always used this snare drum. So this snare drum, from the time he bought it, was pretty much used on every single Beatle record or song. And what's interesting about it is that the normal size of this drum shell in the catalogs and anything you look talking about it says that it should be a 5-inch deep by 14-inch, and this drum shell is 5.5 inches. So that extra half inch, gives a snare drum a different sound. And so I asked Ringo about this, and he didn't know that it was a fluke being a little bit deeper. And I said, well, why would you keep using this one? And even though you got other snare drums, you kept using this. And he was, I like the way it sounded. I just liked the sound. And then I let him know. I said, that the other jazz festivals that he had were 5 inches. And so Ringo just smiled and he said to me, I guess I got good ears. So, but yeah, it's an amazing drum. Sounds great. And on the bottom, we found all the dust because it's never really been taken apart. And but we noticed all that collecting. So Scotty and I deemed that either Stardust or Beetle dust, whatever you prefer to call it.
That when I saw this in the book, it kind of blew my mind. This is the snare drum that was played on the studio recordings from around April '63 till when roughly?
The very end, yeah,
Till the end.
yeah, and until the end, like it's to Abbey Road.
So when we hear Ringo playing the drums on Beatles records, this is the drum that he played.
Yeah, and when you listen to the snare drum, you hear all the different sounds. If you listen to Help as an example, the drum is very high pitched and tight. When you listen to it on Let It Be, it's very deep, and warm. So he got all kinds of different sounds out of that one drum.
That's astonishing. It really is.
Mm-hmm.
You'd have thought that being in the biggest band in the world, he would have had warehouses full of drum combinations to choose from every time they came to record. But he stayed with this 1963 snare all the way to the end.
Yeah, and imagine the value of this drum. Amazing.
I know you can't, can you? You can't.
Yeah.
Well, sticking with drums, another key aspect of the Beatles' evolution, and another way that their visual identity was really strong straight out of the gate, was the now iconic drop T logo on the bass drums. Now, you address this quite a few times in the book, and there's a really interesting story behind this. So, yeah, tell us a bit about how that logo came about.
Okay, I'll try to make this one quick. When I took one of the heads off of one of the toms on Ringo's one of his Oyster Black Pearl kits, there was a business card inside. It said Dave Golding, Drum City. And I was calculating, going like, this has been in here for 50 years. So I managed to track down Dave Golding, and we actually met in Manchester. And so through a lot of phone and email conversations, he came prepared, and he brought what you see here, and here it is right here. What he had told me was, he said, Gary, I had this white placard on my workbench when I worked for Drum City, and if I had it today, I would be a very wealthy man. And I said, what is it? So he said, when we got the order for Ringo's first order for a drum kit, I was told we had to contact our friend Eddie Stokes, who is a sign painter, to come up with an idea to paint the drum head. And he says, so he did. And he says, and this is what I remember being on that placard. He says, so Eddie gave it to me. He goes, I contacted Neil Aspinall. Mal wasn't around then. Neil came in, took the placard, took it back, and he was only able to track down George. This was at the same time when the Beatles were going on vacation, and that's when John went with Brian to Spain. So, so George, he according to Dave Golding, made the selection. And so I was tending to believe Dave, because I'm thinking he's not taking credit for anything. He's just telling a story. And so someone put me in touch with Eddie Stokes' son, who lives in Toronto currently. His name's Richard Stokes. And I contacted him, and he's telling me a story about his dad. And I said, you know what, your father, according to legend, just seemed to be like a painter that just had a withered arm, and that was from polio, and just painted shop windows and drum heads. And the story just makes it sound like he was a street person just trying to get by. But Eddie was actually an artist, and he worked for Disney Productions. Really? And he had an office in Piccadilly Circus. And so he was a very talented person. He died young, and Richard told me that when his dad passed away, the family got a letter from Walt Disney saying how much Eddie meant to the company. So he was an established artist. And in fact, over my shoulder here, you could see it's a collage of photos, or they're actually it's a collage of paintings that Eddie did. And,
those are Eddie Stokes paintings.
Yeah, Yeah.
Wow.
And Richard actually gave me that because I shined a spotlight on his dad in the book, and he was just very happy that uh, that story got out. So
That's a lovely story, a really lovely
yeah,
story. And it
it's a
also
very
is
very
just a wonderful nugget of information that it was actually George who signed off on this.
yeah,
Who'd have thought? I always assumed it would have been Brian, and there would have been lengthy consultations with all the Beatles as to which logo they
especially
liked.
with them being
Paul,
artists.
yeah, exactly. I mean,
You,
Paul would have had
yeah,
something to say about it, and
yeah, and
but
and the other part of the story, the original part of the story was that there was a the owner of Drum City, a guy named by the name of Ivor Arbetter. He claims that when the deal was made for to buy the drum kit, that he pulled a piece of blank paper out from his desk and he came up with the logo emphasizing beat. And he could have had the instructions of, hey, see if you can come up with something emphasizing beat and Beatles, but I guess we're never really gonna know.
it's one of those eternal Beatles mysteries. But you've done
Yeah,
some great research there in coming up with the possible contenders for the crown. Well, as well
yeah,
as drums, there are many, many drums in this book. The book is also about threads. And Ringo, it has to be said, was a very natty dresser from even before the Beatles days. Um, let's have a look now at some Beatles boots, because the Beatle boots were another aspect of their general visual image that really stood out from the outset. And I think, like we were saying just now about the Drop T logo, Brian and the band really gelled on this front. They were both they all thought visually, they all thought how to make maximum impact, how to look great, how to look different. The boots, well, we can see that silhouette, and we all know what that is. Do you did you find original pairs of boots from 62, 63 in Ringo's archive?
yeah. Ringo actually has a pair. They're well worn, but he has them,
Really?
and it's interesting to see. Yeah, they're the leather is very soft and pliable,
Mm.
and his Beatle boots have a lot of miles on them, but they're Beatle boots, and he has them. So yeah, and that would have had to have been one of the first things he had to purchase when he joined the Beatles.
Because no one else was wearing these. I mean, these were still very, very unusual for especially for just guys their age to be wearing. I mean, these were based on, I think, flamenco boots, weren't they? They were sold by Anello and David, the dance shoe retailers in London. So this wasn't, you wouldn't just be walking into a shop on the high street and buying these boots.
Well, that's some of the things I found interesting was because from what I learned was that uh, when the Beatles were in uh, Hamburg, there was a London band playing there too, and they were wearing the boots, and then it was like, hey, where'd you get those? And they pointed them in the direction. So the Beatles first started wearing them, and then I think it was after they had a relationship and they realized, oh my God, all these boots are handmade. So can we have them a little higher? Can we use a different material? That's when you start seeing all the different types of variations that they had.
So there wasn't just one standard style. There were lots of subtle differences and
Yeah,
little
yeah,
signature. Wow.
yeah.
That's fantastic. Well, we have also the suits. Now, the book is full of suits, and we don't obviously have time to go through all of the suits, but there are one or two that I just want to quickly bring up. Um, there's this natty number. This will be recognizable if you remember those pictures from around, 65, 66, when their suits started to flower and
Yeah.
grow more and more flamboyant. Who's this one by?
I'm not recalling. I'm blanking out. But the one thing I can tell you, when you go through um, uh, his wardrobe, uh, everything is made at a very high end.
Mm.
It's nothing like, well, it's a stage suit, and here you go. It's like one size fits all. Everything was custom. Everything was perfectly tailored, and it's just impressive if just to look at these garments and just to see how well made they are.
And they're still in such good condition. So all of these were stored in London. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah. And now everything, all of his Beetle items are all secured. in a um, temperature, humidity controlled vault in an undisclosed location underneath the ocean. Yeah.
Unsea, guarded by a group of octopuses. Uh, you've got so many amazing suits in here, and there are so many anecdotes. But I think I'm just going to skip ahead to one suit that I think everyone's going to recognize. Um, Everyone around the world is going to recognize this one suit. Dun, 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 there we go. We're talking about the suit on the far left. And that is, of course, well, that's Mr. Billy Shears. There he is in his Sergeant Pepper outfit. And it must have been fascinating to look back on this period, especially with Ringo, because for such a flamboyant dresser, for such a colourful, charismatic character, he must have had some interesting memories to share with you about this time.
Yeah, this it makes me laugh now because what had happened was when we were doing the book, we had one day where we took all of the garments um, and had them all in one big room, put everything on mannequins. I set up his drum kits, and this was a day all specific for the book. So it was filmed with me spending the day with Ringo, and we went down all of the mannequins, and he would talk about them, and just watching him light up, feeling the material, and him guessing who the tailor was, and then opening up a jacket to look and see the label inside, and watching him say, "Yes, I was right," and the same with the drums. But with this, it was an unbelievable trip down memory lane. And when I saw uh, um, sections of the film or video that was shot when we were together, when we got to this jacket, he just said some really funny things, and it was yeah, it was just a very, very special time.
It clearly brings back happy memories for him. He's not looking at revisiting these garments and feeling anything negative. It sounds like just pure joy, really, when he's
Oh yeah,
around them.
definitely. Yeah, and what's amazing on a personal note is you just see him light up, and then it's he had the wow factor of him putting the jackets on, and they fit. They still fit, and it's like wow, it's just absolutely amazing to see.
That To have Ringo stand in front of you and slip the Sergeant Pepper jacket on, that must have been
Yeah, and
another
then
one.
to sit behind a drum kit and play the same drum kit that he would have played at this during the Pepper time. And so it's like I'm getting answers to all these questions. I'm getting free drum lessons from him playing the kits. Yeah, it was to be a fan and to be in that world was like it's who gets that.
Well, let's stick with the drums. And around this time, Ringo had changed away from that famous drop T logo that we've been talking about, and true to the spirit of 1967, he'd gone for a Love logo there, a bright red logo, still playing the Ludwig black pearl drums, but with a very different drum head. Um, what happened to that drum head? Because I know you've got an interesting story about where that went next.
Yeah. First of all, I asked Ringo. I said, "Who painted the head?" And he said he didn't know. He couldn't remember.
Mm.
But what I learned, someone emailed me saying, "Gary, check out this screen grab," and this is the photo you're seeing is from the Hey Jude promotional film, and if you look closely at the drum head, you'll see that the yellow and orange head was painted over to this like burnt orange or blood orange color, and you can see the V and the E from the original head. So it's like okay, mystery solved. But even though they're the same drum head, just two different versions. Apparently, it's lost to history.
Wow, isn't that strange? He painted
Mm-hmm.
over that. And yeah, this was only a year later.
Yeah,
Well, throughout the majority of the Beatles' career, he used obviously the black Ludwig oyster kit, but he begins to expand, literally, as we can see here, his sonic palette with the 1967 Ludwig Hollywood model drum kit. Now, this drum kit has got an exceptional history to it. So, just tell us a little bit more about when this came into Ringo's story and
Okay.
and
Yeah.
where we know this from.
All right. Ringo got this September, I think, I believe it was September 11th of 68. And it was a simple story. There was all these different versions. And when I had the chance to ask Ringo, he just, and I backed it up with Mal Evans' diaries.
Of
I
course.
contacted a gentleman by the name of Ken Womack, and he was helping me looking through. And it was just a simple story. Ringo just decided he wanted a proper drum kit. He went with Mal Evans to Drum City. This drum set was there. Ringo bought it, and it was delivered the next day. And the day it was delivered, that was the same day that the Beatles were working on Glass Onion. And Ringo actually took part of his one of his Oyster Black Pearl kits and part of this kit, and tried using double bass drums, but I guess things just didn't work out, and apparently things weren't kept to take. Yeah, so, but that's where this kit came from.
And of course, we could see that there's the old 1963 snare that's still there.
Yeah.
So that was there.
Yeah.
But yeah, he decided he wanted a bigger sound. I mean, I think these had calfskin heads, didn't they?
Not originally. He had them put on for the Abbey Road session. But what was interesting
Right.
about this, one of the stories was, and Ringo didn't really buy into it, but this would have been right around the same time when John and George and Paul were sanding the finish off of their guitars, and it was said that by Donovan, who encouraged them to do it. Hey, if you sand the finish off your guitars, you have the natural wood and it'll breathe better, give it a different sound. And so that, we're just wondering if maybe that was kind of something subliminally in Ringo's head when he got this kit, because according to the diary of Mal, it was like Ringo's biggest decision was, do I want a glitter kit or a new wood kit? So.
And when you found this kit, I believe it was in quite a poor state, wasn't it? A lot of work had to be done on this.
Majority of the hardware on the drums itself was highly corroded and pitted. Every drum on the inside just smelled like mildew. And we were able to put everything back together using a lot of the parts from my collection. But I really feel that if we didn't do it at the time when we did, that drum set would probably not be around today.
It's astonishing for such a historical instrument. Whoever was in charge of storing it or wherever it was stored, that it could be neglected like that. Because yes, we can see here you've devoted a page to close-ups in the book, and when you examine it closely, it is mind-blowing. And there was some sanding, wasn't there? Some of the
actually, what it looks when you look closely at the pictures, someone like took a solvent and it actually like dissolved the finish and just kind of bunched things up, and it's a head scratcher. I don't know who did it, but it's like when you did it originally once and you realize you made a mistake, why would you keep on going to different drums and doing the same thing? So I don't know if I don't know who that was, but it wasn't a bright person.
I hope maybe it was Donovan trying to take the take the lacquer off. Hey, this is more natural. Okay, so this drum kit, in my mind, and I'm sure in all our minds, is associated with one very, very, very famous event, which was the rooftop gig. And this is January 30th, 1969. And in the book, you quite rightly make a big deal of this event, because not only do we have the maple kit, but if you look, Ringo is wearing quite the distinctive coat there. And well, tell us a little bit about this garment, or to give it its proper name, the cherry red vinyl raincoat.
Yeah, it was he borrowed it from Maureen, who is his wife, who was there on the rooftop with him, and so he wore it. And one of the surprising things with that is when we were setting things up to put them on mannequins for that video I was talking to you about, it was like I took the jacket off the clothes hanger, and there's a pair of matching pants. So it's a full ensemble.
But were they red PVC pants?
Yeah, yeah, with
Blind.
the black buttons, just like the jacket.
I mean, when I first heard that story, it did strike me as being slightly unchivalrous that poor Maureen was left freezing in the cold while Ringo borrowed her rain mac. But you have to say it looked fantastic, and it's still. I mean, there we are. Look now. Look at him sitting there. Fits perfectly.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
It
He's
makes you
clearly very
smile as well.
well. A year. I mean, 1969 was the Beatles' last full year of being a band, and here is another one of the most famous of all Beatles images. And well, you have that coat in the book. You have that coat that Ringo's wearing, which I always thought for some reason was by Tommy Nutter, who was he had done the suit, hadn't he? He'd done Paul's suit and John's suit in this photo, the
Yeah,
famous
yeah,
London.
yeah. Apparently, he made a lot of suits for all of them, and he or someone was giving Tommy Nutter a claim saying, "Hey, on the Abbey Road album, three of the Beatles are all wearing Tommy Nutter originals," and we found out that it's not true. So
What is that coat then? Who did make it?
it was a Grafton original by Keith Herbert, and um, there was a little backstory about that coat. It was the person who owned it uh, was looking to sell it, put it up for auction, and Scotty got wind, and he contacted me saying, "Hey, can you help to see if we can get this coat back for Ringo?" And the short of it is, another person got involved by the name of Robert Bird, and between Scotty, myself, and Robert, we got the coat back, and we gave it to Ringo in February of 1980 as an early birthday present. And Ringo was so happy to get it back. That was a story in itself, to be able to do that for him.
So he wouldn't have seen that coat for all those years.
Yeah, I think he last time he actually knew of its whereabouts was in 1980. So it's been a long time. So, and the cool part, just to share briefly, we go to his house to give it to him. It's wrapped up in a box. He takes the lid off, and then he jokingly says, "Oh, you got me a box of fancy tissue paper." So we say, "No, no, no, move that out of the way." And then he pulls the jacket out, and it unfurls, and he goes, "Oh, you got me a black jacket." And so we start telling him what it is, and he's like, "What?" And so he puts it on. He runs his right arm through the sleeve, and he says, "I've got short arms, and this fits." And then he puts it on, and then and we said, "That's your Abbey Road jacket." And he was so happy. And then he said, "Let's walk like we're crossing Abbey Road." And he just starts walking in the room, and we're following behind him. And we walk outside into the driveway and had some pictures taken. And he disappears into the house. I guess he really got emotional. And then Barbara came out and said to us, "You made my husband very, very happy. Thank you." And then a short time later, Ringo came out and thanked us. And yeah, it was such a special event in time.
I think we could talk for hours and hours and hours, and there are so many great stories and anecdotes in this book which are like that. I would just recommend, obviously I would, but obviously I would recommend that if you're watching this and you're enjoying these stories, to get hold of a copy of the book, and you'll find the stories that we've been talking about and loads more in there to be discovered. We are now going to hand over to you, to your questions. So during the talk with Gary, people have been writing in with questions, and I believe Mason at the Beatles Story has been gathering up all the questions, and he will now put them to Gary, as well as announce the winner of the competition to win a signed copy of Beats and Threads. Okay, can you see that question, Gary? What
Nope.
avenues of research? Okay, I'll read it to you. What avenues of research do you use to track down Ringo's equipment, and is it already well documented?
Some of it was well documented. A lot of it, Ringo has, thank God. Other sources uh, are just lining up multiple stories from different people and trying to put the pieces of the puzzle together.
Okay, thanks. Another question. When you were learning drums as a child, did you set up your kit in the same order as Ringo? And he sits quite high on his stool too.
Yeah, actually, I did do the same thing, and it was really awkward for me being 6'4". So, but it was like I had to be just like Ringo. But yeah, that's what I did, and it wasn't until years later when I learned about ergonomics and setting things that are comfortable for your body and how you move. So,
You know that you've got that Sonos stool in the book with the
yeah.
69. Was that the first time that he was using a stool with a backrest? Because I can't
No,
remember
actually,
seeing.
he had one for during the Get Back sessions, and the original ones were somebody had actually made them for him. They were actually
Okay.
homemade. Yeah, and then the Sonar was the first one that he purchased, and that was used for the Abbey Road album recordings.
Um, what is Ringo's most difficult song to play on the drums?
Um, a lot of them, even simple ones, are hard to play just because of his feel and things. But when you get involved in uh, fills and things, Abbey Road, any of the songs on there that have a lot of drum fills, like She Came In Through the Bathroom Window, things like that, they're all hard to figure out.
What do you think is the most special item in this book?
Um, I just have to say the whole book. The whole book is special. Yeah.
Okay, that was sent in by a Mr. R. Starkey from Los Angeles, by the way. Um, are, are all the photos previously unpublished, or have any been published before?
There are some that are photos that you'll know because we had to have some kind of a reference for people, but the majority are all uh, unpublished photos that are just absolutely spectacular.
You were talking about the shoot that you did with Ringo, where it was being filmed and he was slipping on his vintage garments. He was sitting behind the kits. What do you have any other specific memories from that day? Just being around him and the team that day, and sort of it to me, it sounds like you were guiding him on a trip down memory lane, which is just quite an astonishing thing to do.
Yeah, that was pretty much it because there was a lot for him to go back on, right? I mean, it's just like you're looking at stuff, and I'm sure your mind's like racing, like, yeah, it looks familiar, but
Mm.
and to go through the whole wardrobe, and then to go into drums, and then drum playing questions. When we did this event at the end of going through this tour and him playing each one of the drum kits, and which is cool by itself because you're watching a Beatle playing the drum kits for the very last time. So very an emotional thing. But then what we did was they had two chairs set up in front of the Ed Sullivan drum kit, and it's all illuminated things. And then there was a director, and so they had me just sitting next to Ringo, asking him questions and talking to him for 45 minutes. And after the fact, when I thought about it, it hit me and I cried. And I can do it now because you figured like 60 plus years later, from being that 7-year-old boy, now here I am with the drum kit that changed my life sitting right behind me. And the guy that I loved dearly and uh, grew up worshiping sitting right next to me. It's like, talk about going full circle. It's like, who yeah, very emotional, and it was. Uh, I'm just blessed and honored to be the guy out of the millions and millions and millions of fans to somehow make it to this level and to do what I've done. So
Well,
it's yeah.
just a wonderful, wonderful experience hearing you share these stories. And like you say, that must be indescribable to remember being that 7-year-old boy at the beginning of our talk. You remember it so well, sitting with your family, with your relatives, watching this, and to come full circle and be sitting yourself at that kit and with the man who made those dreams happen for you. So Gary, thank you so much for your time today. It's been an absolute pleasure
Arsalan,
to talk
thank
to
you.
you. And
Yeah,
I
and a
know
quick
we've
one, I just want to thank you. I want to thank Darren. I want to thank Julien. I want to thank Beatles Story, all the people, and Scotty, because he'll be the one to say, you never mention my name. You never say anything.
We do actually have two more things to talk about. So the last question is, where can we buy the book?
Very good. You can go to juliensauctions.com, first of all. And I think you'd be better versed after I say you can get it at the Beatles Story shop. And for more locations,
you can. So you can get it at the Beatles Store Museum. You can get it at juliensauctions.com. And soon it will be available on Ringo's merch site itself, which is great. Okay, so we have one last piece of business to attend to, and that is our competition winner. And I'm very happy to say that our competition winner is Audra Bland. So congratulations, Audra, and we will be contacting you by email. So you are getting a signed deluxe edition of Beats and Threads. So congratulations. Well,
excellent.
That's everything from me. Thank you all for joining us tonight. Thank you again to Gary for his time. Thank you to the Beatles Story Museum for collaborating with us on this talk. And I really, really hope you all enjoyed it. I know that we could have talked a lot more because there's a lot more. There are many, many more stories. But for now, thank you all.
Oh, I get by with a little help from my friends. Gonna try with a little help from my friends. I get by with a little help from my friends. Yes, I get by with a little help from my friends. With a little help from my friends. Let's hear it for my friend Billy Shears. Peace and love, everybody.